Hi everyone, welcome back. I'm Michael Sandler, your host on Inspire Nation. If you've ever just struggled to figure out what in the world is safe to eat, then do we have the Feeding You Lies show for you. Today I'll be talking with Vani Hari, New York Times best-selling author, food activist, the founder of foodbabe.com, and the author of a brilliant book on transcending the lies and eating healthy, feeding your lies. And that's just what I want to talk with her about today, about unraveling the food industry's playbook and reclaiming your health. That, plus we'll talk about golden grams by the boxload, Fiber One on yogurt, chemical filet, Chipotle and GMOs, Starbucks and caramel, Subway and yoga mats, the secret of Gatorade, the power of Annie's bunnies, and what in the world no mud, no lotus has to do with anything. So welcome to the show, Vani. Are you ready to shine?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me here, Michael.
Well, thank you so much for being here. Before we dive right into things, what was your diet like growing up?
I grew up with two immigrant Indian parents who came here to the United States, very trusting of the American food supply. And after my mom and dad had an arranged marriage in India, they came here on their honeymoon. And the first thing my dad introduced my mom to was a McDonald's hamburger. And he says, if we're going to live in America, we're going to eat like Americans. And that's really how I was raised, that I could eat anything I really wanted as long as it was cheap and easy for my mom to make, because my mom didn't know how to make any traditional American food. She only knew the traditional Indian cooking that she had learned back in India. So she relied heavily on processed foods, all of the different things that you would find in the middle store aisles of a typical grocery store, all the things you'd find in the freezer section and things that you just add water to, cake mixes and hamburger helper and Salisbury steak and all of those things I grew up on. And as a result, I had a lot of health issues. And I thought that these health issues were genetic because my brother was also experiencing them, but I had no idea that they were actually related to the way that I was eating. And it wasn't until my early 20s where I just hit rock bottom. I had just gotten this fancy job where they put me on the road and I was on this expense account and I was traveling and they were bringing in catered meals and letting us eat whatever we wanted. And again, I found myself in this situation where I was outsourcing my food decisions to other people instead of packaged processed goods. Now I was outsourcing it to my corporate partners who wanted me to really work through breakfast, lunch, and dinner in order to bill hours to the client. And found myself just hit rock bottom. I was overweight, feeling very sick, depressed, and ended up in the hospital with appendicitis, where I had an appendectomy. And it was recovering from that surgery that I made a commitment to myself that I was never going to feel this bad about myself again, and I was going to figure out how to be healthy. And I started to channel this energy that I had learned in high school, where I was a nationally ranked debater, was number one in state 3 years in a row. And back then, I'm almost 40 now. Back then, we didn't have Google, so you had to go to the library, you had to look at the microfiche, you had to look at the law journals,
Yep.
You had to make photocopies of all your evidence and carry it around these big tubs across the country to win debate rounds. And one year's topic was healthcare, and I remember how screwed up the healthcare system was. But I was using that information to win debate rounds, but I wasn't really using any of that information I was learning back then on my health. And so I started to remember this as I was searching for the truth about what I was eating and how to be really healthy. And the things that I started to uncover about the food industry and the food that I was eating really started to just shock me, so much so that I just couldn't shut up about it. There's this phrase that I read in one of the books that I checked out, this big, thick nutrition manual. It's called Conscious Eating by Gabriel Cousens. And, he said in there, processed food is like dead food. And that just really rang home with me. And I realized, yeah, it is dead food, but it's also full of man-made chemicals. A lot of it is anyways. And I started to research and study what these food chemicals were and what they were doing in the body. And figured out that a lot of the chemicals that the food manufacturers use here in the United States are actually banned in other countries. And I started to share this information with my friends as I was learning it. They couldn't believe it. They saw the transformation I was making on the physical side outside, my appearance. I started to look like a different person. I started to feel like a different person. And they saw this. And so they were like, what are you doing? What we want you to teach us. Can you start a blog? And I was still working in the corporate world, living this very unconventional lifestyle because, trying to eat organic or plant-based or whole foods when you're in a very like cookie cutter environment where it's very fast paced, when everyone's eating fast food and just rushing around, drinking lots of coffee, eating whatever's available, to now a person who's very conscious about what they're eating, I stuck out like a sore thumb with everyone at work. I mean, I became known as like the health conscious person, or, they'd make some label about, oh, we're going out to eat with Vani. She's going to ask the server 10 questions about the food. And I just became known as this like health junkie at work. But luckily what that allowed me to do is to start to influence others around me. Like for example, there was a woman who was sitting next to me in my cubicle that had problems with sleep and just was lethargic all the time and never had a lot of energy. And she started to implement some of my habits just by sitting next to me at work every day. And her life just started to dramatically change. And this really inspired me to share information on a blog. And I wanted to call the blog eathealthyliveforever.com. And my husband, who is the tech geek in the family, I said to him, hey, can you go register this name? And he's like, no way. That is an awful name. We're not registering that name. No one's going to remember that. How about I'll come up with a better name? And I was like, okay, fine. Yeah. And he found the name Food Babe on auction for like $10 online and yells out, how about Food Babe? And at first, I never felt like a babe for most of my life. So it felt very foreign to use that name to call my blog. And so I said, well, why don't we make it about helping everyone become their own food babe? And so for the first year and a half of blogging, I actually never put my photo on the blog, on the main header. And I hid behind the name Food Babe and actually signed all my blog posts Food Babe. And even today, if I share an old blog post that I wrote, you'll see it signed Food Babe and not Vani, because I was still working in the corporate world. I still kind of wanted to keep this hidden passion or the secret passion for health and food away from my corporate career, because, I was working for like C-level executives. I didn't want them to know that I had this other passion. And I gave up actually television in order to find time to do this outside of work. And I would just find myself every weekend and every night after work just excited to discover something new or share something new on Food Babe. And eventually I started to build a community online. At first it was like my mom and my couple friends who were following. And then eventually I started to realize there's a whole group of people out there that not only care about their health, but they're willing to do whatever it takes to get things to change. And it was when I first started blogging that I shared a story actually about a yogurt chain that refused to tell me what was in their food, but they had all sorts of marketing on their wall that said organic tastes better. And, they were marketing themselves as really healthy and clean. And then when I figured out that my favorite flavor was full of blue dye and other artificial ingredients, I couldn't believe it. And so I had to tell people. I told people online. And this was one of the first times a food company responded to my writings, because this blog post went viral. And so many people contacted their customer service and said, well, what's the deal here? I can't believe this. You're supposed to have organic yogurt, but you're using blue dye. And not only did they respond to me, but the CEO wrote me a personal letter and apologized and said he would change his ingredients. And it was right then and there that I realized the power that I had as a blogger. And I became a food activist after that, really. And so I started blogging about different fast food chains in ways that I had been duped about, thinking something was healthy and not. And one of the next companies I took on was Chick-fil-A. And they were a company that, everyone thought as a cleaner fast food company, safer than McDonald's and Wendy's and Burger King. And really they were serving us the same stuff when you looked at the actual ingredients of what they were serving us. One of the main chemicals in it was MSG, an ingredient that's used to actually fatten up rats in obesity studies. And it actually fattens up people too, because it creates an addictive quality to the food. Also, there's like close to 100 ingredients in a Chick-fil-A sandwich. And so I shared this for the first time. And not only did Chick-fil-A respond, they invited me to their headquarters and they consulted with me. And when I realized I was taking off work of my day job to go down and consult with food companies, I realized that my ability to get food companies to change is a true gift. And I need to do something about it. And I need to go out on a limb and quit my job and be a food activist full time. And luckily I did end up doing that. And, but it was a very hard decision because, I had to quit cold turkey. There's no money being made on foodbabe.com. It was just a pure passion project. But I realized that my passion was my mission. And the mission that I was doing as a corporate consultant was no longer, and I needed to follow my calling. And so I did. And I just remember the first time I sat down on the couch after I made this decision, I just was so nervous because I was like, how am I going to support myself? How am I going to buy organic food? The things that, I really care about in terms of my health. And one of the first things I did was figure out how to buy organic food on a budget. And I actually put together 75 tips that I followed personally during that time period of my life so that I could still buy organic food. And I put those tips actually on foodbabe.com for everyone else to see. But, as soon as I started giving 100% of my energy to becoming a food activist and writing about food full time, things started to dramatically change. I started to take on some of the biggest food companies in the world by asking them to do basic things that I felt like that were just basic common sense principles that every food company should abide by. For example, I found that a lot of US companies were reformulating their products in other countries with safer and better ingredients. And one of the main companies that was doing this was Kraft. And Kraft was doing this with a lot of different products, but one of their main flagship products, Kraft mac and cheese, they had actually taken out artificial food dyes overseas, but were still using them here. And the reason they took them out overseas is because in Europe and the UK, it requires a warning label that says may cause adverse effects on activity and attention in children. And when you use an artificial food dye in Europe, you have to have this warning label. And Kraft said, you know what, we don't want to put this warning label on our product. So we're going to reformulate our product without these additives. We're going to use basic natural ingredients like paprika and beta carotene. But you know what, we're going to keep selling the cheaper, toxic, petroleum-based synthetic food dyes here in the United States. And I felt like that was very unethical. I felt like that double standard was un-American. I also felt like that this needed to be talked about in a big way. And so we started a petition. It got over 300,000 signatures. I went to Kraft headquarters to deliver those petitions. And eventually Kraft had to change because so many people became aware about this topic and they stopped buying their product and started actually buying another competitor's product, Annie's, which ended up getting bought by General Mills for over $800 million. But anyways, so this is this kind of work that I started to do. And what really, around this time is when I got my first book, proposal and book deal from a big publisher, Little Brown, and I released Food Babe Way back in 2015. And my first book was all about the chemicals in food and how to get them out of your diet. And because I was doing campaigns that garnered a lot of media attention, it thrust me into the national spotlight, and the amount of fans that I got and just the amount of impact that our community was having, who I call the Food Babe Army, the people that are just so incredibly passionate about creating change. The food industry felt like we were a big threat to them because there's millions and millions of dollars at stake when you make these kind of changes at corporations. And I started to take on some of the biggest ideas in the food chain, including synthetic pesticides, Roundup, glyphosate, which now the World Health Organization deems a probable carcinogen, something that's sprayed on 80% of our farmland. And during this time is when I received a ton of online feedback in terms of astroturfing campaigns, which I talk about in my newest book, Feeding You Lies, which you can see right here. This book
got my copy right here too.
That's awesome. So this book right here, Feeding You Lies, is actually all about the tactics and the playbook that I learned the food industry is willing to deploy to prevent us from knowing the truth about their food. And the way that I figured this out was actually their personal attacks on me. The critics they use, the experts they use to plant stories in major newspapers. For example, these critics all seemed very third party. They were from universities, public universities. They seemed like professors or scientists or chemists or food chemistry professors. And every time that there was an article written about a chemical that we were removing from some major food corporation, whether it was a chemical that Subway was using that it's also found in yoga mats, or getting other companies to stop the routine use of antibiotics, or getting General Mills and Kellogg's to take out BHT, an endocrine disrupting hormone chemical that they spray in the liner of cereal bags that shouldn't be there. They don't use it overseas. So they shouldn't be using it here, especially in products that are targeted towards children. But, all these different little campaigns, getting Starbucks to remove caramel coloring class D, which is considered a probable carcinogen by the World Health Organization. I mean, all of these campaigns, every time they were written about, they also included an antagonist in the story that would weasel their way into the story, and it would be some public professor. And at the time, I couldn't prove it, but just the way that they were sounding and the way that they were acting, I could tell they were working with the food companies themselves, or the chemical companies that these chemicals were being produced by. And I would tell the reporter, like, hey, you should look into this guy. This guy has met a chemical he doesn't like. What's going on here? Like, you need to see where his funding's coming from. And these reporters would ask these professors, like, hey, are you getting paid by, the chemical and food corporations? And they literally would say no. They would blatantly lie to these reporters. And the reason why I know that they were lying is because I actually submitted Freedom of Information Act requests, which is your right as an American citizen to do, and in Canada, by the way, to submit requests to receive data that is publicly available, especially if it's publicly funded, like from public universities. So I submitted a Freedom of Information Act request to basically to get every single email correspondence with my name and these other guys that would show up in all these stories. And what I found out was absolutely startling. So what actually happened through the submitting of these requests is I received all of this information that started to unravel the food industry's playbook, how they reach out to these independent experts and pay them behind the scenes to discredit messengers of change like myself. And it's not just me as a food activist that this has happened to. This is every single food activist. Everyone from Dr. Vandana Shiva to Carrie Gillum, who has written Whitewash, to others out there that have come before me to try to change the food industry. And it's Robin O'Brien's another great example of this. They will do everything they can to target us, who wants the food industry to change and just act ethical. And they'll do whatever they can to keep the status quo. And you'll see these critics try to paint activists as pseudoscientific, as a fearmonger, I've been called everything under the sun, that I'm stupid, I don't understand science, all these things. And what I really want people to recognize is that food is not complicated. Actually, the only people that have made food complicated are the food scientists that have created these chemicals that have these long, unpronounceable names that you have to go study and figure out what they're doing in our food. And it's easy to do that, by the way. It's very easy to figure out where these chemicals are, what they're doing, and why they're there. And when you do determine that, you'll realize that 99% of them have actually just been invented to improve the bottom line of the food industry, not really improve the nutritional qualities of our food. So they're not actually coming up with a way that we can get healthier. They're coming up with a way for them to make more money. And so that's what's really important for people to recognize. And you don't need to be a nutritionist or scientist to figure out how to eat. You can actually read this stuff and learn it yourself. And actually in this book, Feeding You Lies, I give people the tools and the tactics that the food industry uses against them so that they become so crazy smart that the next time the food industry tries to convince us that something's healthy when it's actually not, we can call it out. And that is really what my goal for this book is, so that you become so savvy and smart about all of these manipulations that the food industry does and the propaganda that they're able to get through the media and through different front groups that look like reputable and credible sources, but they're actually not. And I want people to recognize that they can become their own health investigator, they can become their own food investigator, and just be as smart as they absolutely can be.
Awesome. Beautiful. Thank you for sharing on all that. So I want to dive in. I want to talk a lot about ways that we can navigate these waters. First off, let's talk real briefly, just a tiny bit more about the food industry. You say food's got this big food, as you call it, has a dirty secret. What are front groups, trade groups? What are these things that are going on, and how do we recognize them when we're reading an article that says, for instance, coconut oil is bad?
Yeah, so that's a great example, actually. So coconut oil, a few months ago, it was everywhere. It was on every newspaper. It was all over social media. It was, there was a headline that says, coconut oil isn't healthy and it's never been. And it confused so many people to the point where, I'm getting texts from my mother going, what is the deal with coconut oil? I thought it was healthy. And everyone thought it was healthy because it's one of the most unrefined oils that there is. There are some really beneficial qualities to the fact that it's unrefined, and it doesn't have those inflammatory properties that other oils have, where they have an imbalance of omega-6 to omega-3 fatty acids. So, it's one of the oils that we prefer to cook with over some of the other things that are available out there. And what happened is the food industry, because they were losing sales on corn and soy and canola oil, they launched a major campaign to take down coconut oil. And they actually were funding two different scientists that sat on the American Heart Association board from the corn and the canola industry, along with Unilever, who actually makes these oils, funded these individuals to look at a study based on saturated fat, not even the specific kind of fat that coconut oil is, which is a completely different kind of saturated fat. It's a medium chain triglyceride. So they cherry picked data. Then they added a big, evil sign to coconut oil, and they funneled this actually through the American Heart Association, an association that looks so reputable and credible to the innocent bystander out there. They think, oh, American Heart Association, they're looking after my heart. They want me to avoid heart disease. They don't want me to have a heart attack and have open heart, surgery. No, that's actually not what the American Heart Association is trying to do. The American Heart Association is trying to stay in business, and one of the ways they do stay in business is by taking funding from chemical and food corporations. And actually, they've taken so much funding from them, they even used to put their seal on Trick cereal, if that tells you anything as far as how smart they were in terms of nutrition science. I mean, they have been just completely wrong about the way Americans should be eating, and they've been called out over the decades, and history lessons have showed us that we cannot trust organizations like the American Heart Association with our health because of the influence that food corporations have in their recommendations. And so that's an example of, it's not actually a front group because they tell us where their funding comes from. But another example of actual, like a front group, would be the American Council for Science and Health. This name, American Council for Science and Health, sounds so reputable, so credible to the average bystander. But when you look deep in it, they're actually, mouthpieces for Monsanto and Coca-Cola. These are the type of companies that are funding these kind of individuals who are part of this council to go out into the media and confuse the public about health and science so that we continue to buy the unhealthy products that are available out there, the sodas and the chemicals that are in our food. And that is what a front group really does. And a lot of times you just won't even, you won't even be able to figure out where the funding's coming from. But it's one of the questions that I really think is important for people to ask is, if you see a recommendation from somebody, especially something that just goes against your common sense, like coconut oil is suddenly not healthy, you need to look into who's funding these studies, who's behind this, who are the experts, and start to do some research on your own to figure out if this is actually true or not. You cannot take a lot of this information at face value any longer, especially because it's unfortunate that the media has been swindled by these groups. I mean, I'm talking the American Council for Science and Health had a regular column in the USA Today. The fact that they had a regular column for so long in there, and then some of these groups also had regular columns in Forbes and other magazines and online sources. I mean, it's absolutely ridiculous what's happened in terms of getting, really confusing the public about what's truly healthy.
Thank you. So when we talk about confusing the public, and I keep going back in my mind to my parents, I just visited them in Florida. My dad, I've got him now, finally, I can't believe it. I've got him on green smoothies. I'll take any step that I can in the right direction. We still go out to eat. Mom's getting whatever zero or diet drink she can because she wants to be healthy. We'll get there in a minute. But I know if I heard my dad speaking right now and he read a list of ingredients, he would say, well, this is safe. This has been approved by the FDA.
Yeah, there's this underlying assumption that the FDA, it has this rigorous lab and a lot of people working there that look after all of these food chemicals and food additives that are in our food, or the food products that are, being created on a daily basis from the food industry, that they're overseeing this and they're looking after the safety, but they actually don't even have the manpower to do this. And they actually have admitted that recently, that they don't have the capability to look at all the chemicals that have entered our food supply. And actually over 3,000 of them haven't even been reviewed at all by the FDA, or the FDA doesn't even know that they are in our food supply. I mean, there's no data on it whatsoever, but we know that they're in our food supply. We have over 10,000 chemicals in our food supply, and much of it's unregulated because what's happening is because the FDA doesn't have the manpower to actually oversee this, they rely on the food companies themselves to create the safety data for a lot of these additives. So the food companies will create an additive that makes them more money, then create the safety study that proves it's safe. And they'll use a safety study that's like 3 months, 6 months, maybe 9 months long. And they submit the data to the FDA. Look, it's safe. It didn't cause cancer anywhere. The animals are fine. Everything's good. Let's get this. Let's rubber stamp this. And the FDA will just be like, okay, that sounds good, and just do a little check mark. And what's really happening is no one's looking at the long-term effects of these additives and chemicals, the cumulative effect in the body when you're consuming this additive plus that additive and this additive plus that additive and all of it together. There's no data that can really tell us whether this is actually safe or not. And because this is a massive experiment, and because these additives actually provide zero, majority of them add zero in terms of nutrition to your body, I say opt out. I mean, this is a massive experiment on our bodies. These are additives that have been invented over the last 50 years. We see the skyrocketing disease rates in this country, and I know the way I used to feel when I ate processed foods, and now I feel like a totally different human being. I feel like I was an alien before, walking around like a zombie. And now I just feel like finally I can live life because I'm able to really feel good. And I know there's other people walking around like I used to, because I see what people are eating, and there's still Mountain Dew on shelves and Diet Coke and so much other crap. And I know that people need to recognize what's actually really happening in the food system and decide if they want to be part of this or not. Because I think it's really important that you can make a decision right here and now to decide, hey, you know what? I don't want to be a part of this. I'm going to take back control of my health, and I'm going to start buying unadulterated food, in which the way to do that is just to buy whole, real, organic food.
Thank you. I want to dive into that in about 30 seconds. Before we do that, I'm curious, is there a way? Your book is phenomenal. It ferrets out so much. Is there a way that we can tell what's not allowed in Europe, but's in our food here, and go, well, at least we're going to live by their safety standards?
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, their safety standards are obviously more strict than what we have here. They live by the precautionary principle, and so they have a much stricter onus on the food companies to prove that these additives are safe before they can put them in the food supply. Here in the United States, we have the reverse. And so for us, the best thing we can do is actually, as citizens, is read ingredient lists. Mm-hmm. And if we don't understand an ingredient or don't know why it's there, and if it's not serving a nutritional purpose in your body, put the product back down.
Thank you. Go from there. Let's talk about, maybe we'll talk about your dad specifically, my parents as well. My parents are lean cuisine-aholics, or have been. Your dad had some serious health challenges with going with a low-calorie diet as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So my dad got diagnosed with type 2 diabetes a while back. And when he did, he became very reliant upon and almost addicted to a lot of these artificial sweetener-based products that said sugar-free on them, thinking that it was a free pass for him to eat these. But they actually had as much carbohydrate load as the sugar versions. And so they would spike his blood insulin level just like they would if he were to eat a sugar product. Mm-hmm. And so as a result, he just was always having a hard time controlling his blood sugar levels. They got so bad that it started to affect his brain, and he started to get dementia of the brain. And thankfully, we were able to intervene and get him off a lot of these ingredients and processed foods and get back to a home-cooked diet. And he's been able to control his blood sugar since. It's been incredible to watch.
Thank you. What's the truth about calories and about calorie-free?
Yeah. So, one thing that people don't recognize is when they drink a product that has 0 calories, they think they're doing themselves a favor. But what's really happening, especially if that product is full of natural flavors and artificial sweeteners, those ingredients are actually tricking the brain into thinking you're actually consuming calories. Mm-hmm. So if you don't consume calories and your brain thinks you're consuming calories, your brain's going to be like, well, whoa, I didn't get any energy from that drink, but I got this sweet taste in my brain, so I need to figure out where else to get calories from. So it creates, a trigger to your hunger hormone, and you just continue to eat more than you should, and it creates kind of like this, your cravings start to become out of control. And for people who are trying to lose weight or are looking for a quick fix, this is not the way to really fix your weight and fix your diet and lose weight. The real way to do that is to eliminate these additives altogether and eat real food.
Very good. And are all calories created equal?
No, they're not. And there's just this fantastic quote in the book from Dr. Mark Hyman. He really breaks it down really beautifully. He talks about how 100 calories of broccoli versus 100 calories of a Coke do completely 2 different things in your body in terms of biochemically. And when you look at it that way, you start to realize that the 100 calories of Coca-Cola doesn't equal the same, a calorie isn't a calorie when it comes to what's actually happening in your body.
Thank you. Let's dive into sugar for just one more minute here. What are some of the sneaky names for sugar? Because we sort of get the idea that sugar is not good for us. You actually call it a soft kill, something that takes us out over time. But it's hiding in there everywhere, isn't it?
Yeah, one of the things that food manufacturers do, and this is one of the lies you'll learn in the book, is food manufacturers, because they don't want sugar to be one of the first ingredients when you turn over the package and look at the ingredients, because their product is probably made up of a lot of sugar, they figure out a way to add different kinds of sugars that doesn't say sugar in smaller quantities so that it's listed throughout the label. So one of the first ingredients will be something clean or something less evil, yeah. And then you'll find sugar disguised in various different forms throughout the label. And I actually have a list of many different types of sugar additives that the food industry uses to hide sugar in our food in the book.
So can you give us a couple of your favorites?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's everything from corn syrup solids, high fructose corn syrup. Then you have dextrose, maltose, any of these different things. And then you have, a lot of products will say, oh, made with honey, but then you'll look at the back and it'll have honey, but it'll have sugar or corn syrup added too. So it's just a bunch of different, there's so many different, there's, I think, over 50, I think, in the book that you can actually look at and learn the different names. And it's really important that you do so that you can recognize it.
Thank you. So going back to my dad here, we're cutting him back on regular, particularly non-organic wheat. I want to talk about gluten-free because I met with the head of a gluten-free company in Colorado many years ago, and they said, it's helpful for people, but we don't want people to confuse this with a health food.
Yeah, so the gluten-free industry is a many billion-dollar industry now, and it's something that the food industry really took a hold of because they saw this trend. And anytime there's a new trend, the latest trend is keto, so you're going to see all sorts of keto products start to enter the market. And they've done this with gluten-free, they did it with fat-free, they did it with sugar-free, they did it with low calorie, all the 100-calorie packs that you used to see. They figure out a way to put a label on a product so it has a health halo. And so when you see this sign, gluten-free, on a product, you automatically assume, okay, if I'm avoiding gluten, this is something I can eat. Well, the problem with that is that a lot of these gluten-free products have a ton of sugar or other refined carbohydrates that actually have no purpose to actually eat them. You shouldn't be eating them if you really want to have a healthy lifestyle. The true healthy way to go gluten-free is to eat a lot of fruits, vegetables, nuts, seeds, and other gluten-free ingredients like fats that really, provide a lot of nutritional benefit to the body.
Thank you. My dad stuck on sugary drinks, my mom on her diet drinks. How do we break the sweet tooth habit with our drinks or get off of soft drinks?
Yeah, one of the most effective ways to do this, I think, is just to educate people about what's actually in these drinks. The fact that they're full of artificial chemicals that are linked to cancer. But on top of that, they're in an aluminum can. That's also, an issue, as well as the fact that, just drinking one soda a day increases your risk of heart disease, diabetes, and cancer. I think education really helps in terms of getting people less addicted to these substances. Sometimes it doesn't work, the education, and you just have to really lead by example. I have some tips that, if someone really wants to get off of soda, you can do, which is to flavor your own water. Start with sparkling water so you still get that fizz and carbonated buzz. Kombucha is a nice substitute as well because there's a little caffeine in that as well. And I think it tastes great. And anyways, I hope those tips work for folks that are addicted to soda. Just the thought of drinking a Coca-Cola right now just makes my stomach hurt.
The last one that I drank, I had been cola-free for many years. First I was shocked when I got out of college and learned that the lemonade had been aspartame flavored all those years when I thought I was drinking something better than soft drinks. Then I got off of soft drinks and I went to one of the different sports drinks, which are in this country, I would say they're pretty notorious, maybe a little bit healthier in Europe. Then I went for this long run one day after I was off of all of this. There was a Coke machine, a Pepsi machine at the start of the run. I double back at the 20-mile mark, guzzle my first cola kind of drink in years, and threw up all over the place. My body knew. It knew. Now, going to knowing, a lot of these foods that we eat have the word natural labeled all over this. Does natural mean anything? And I want to pick on specifically here one that we can even find in organic-y stuff, natural flavors.
Yeah, so I dedicated actually a whole chapter to the added flavors that the food industry uses in my new book, Feeding You Lies, because I felt like it was very important for people to recognize that the food companies use these ingredients because their food wouldn't taste good without it. And so you have to think about that for a second of why wouldn't their food taste good without these added flavors? And, the way they're creating these flavors are by, in a laboratory, taking the 1 millionth best part of a blueberry, for example, to create blueberry flavor, and then putting it in something that they're not really using a lot of blueberries in, or maybe not blueberry at all, to make it taste like blueberry so that we'll eat it. And right when you start to look at it that way, you start to realize that it's a lot of non-food substances that they're trying to create that tastes like real food. And it kind of just, I don't know, puts a sour taste in my mouth. And the other reason these additives are, these flavors are added, is to create an addictive quality to the food, so that you remember the flavor, you remember the taste. This is what MSG does. The same thing that happens with flavors, synthesized flavors, whether they're artificial or natural. And I feel like that hijacking of my taste buds is something that I personally want to know that it's happening, but I also want to know that I can opt out. Now, a great example of this is those Annie's chocolate bunnies. They're organic, but if I eat them, I can't stop eating them because they have those natural flavors. Now, if I were to try to make those same things at home, those little chocolate bunnies, or even just a regular chocolate chip cookie at home, I could stop at a couple. And so there's a distinct difference when these flavors are created that create that pop in your brain to make you just go eat more than you should.
I like that. Can't stop eating them. When I coach somebody, that's one of the things I tell them. If you're eating a lot of it and you absolutely love it, stop and ask yourself, what's in it? What is causing me to want more and more and more? Want to cover one more key topic, then we'll do a real fast speed round on things. Weed killer for dinner. So my wife, she's pregnant. I want to talk about a few snacks she can have. She was given, to settle her stomach a couple of days ago, regular saltine type cracker. And I'm thinking to myself about non-organic wheat and what they spray right before harvest.
Yeah, so this is a big deal. So if you are out there buying non-organic wheat, there's a good chance that it was sprayed with Roundup right before harvest. So it's still in the food. And they're finding it in food everywhere. They're doing tests right now that are showing that glyphosate is in our food and in small parts per billion, but if it's everywhere and in everything we're eating, this is going to definitely have some cumulative effect on the amount of exposure we're having. Monsanto has just gotten sued by a man who got non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. They lost the lawsuit, and Monsanto had to award this man millions of dollars because the jury found that Monsanto did cause his cancer. So this lawsuit was filed along with many, many others that are happening right now. There's a trial right now that's going on live as we speak about this. And this is a serious subject. So, they're finding glyphosate in breast milk. It's in our bodies. And so whatever we can do to protect ourselves from these synthetic herbicides, we need to do. And the best way to do that is to buy organic. Now, organic doesn't safeguard you 100% because there is a lot of contamination in terms of our farmland and, with rainwater, et cetera, that can happen. But in all of the studies that I have seen, the organic counterparts to the foods out there have the least amount of glyphosate residue comparative to the conventional foods.
Thank you. What are the top 3 questions you want people to ask themselves when it comes to eating?
I think it's very important to just sit down and have this simple exercise every single time you eat. You can do it for the next 10 meals, and it will start to fundamentally change the way you look at what you're eating. The first question I want you to ask are, what are the ingredients? You've got to know every single ingredient. And if you don't, put the product away until you can research the ingredient and know what's in there. The second thing you need to ask yourself are these ingredients nutritious? You may find natural flavors in your product that you're eating that day. You know the ingredients, you know what they are, you say they're natural flavors, but are natural flavors nutritious? No, they're man-made chemicals that are there to add flavoring to food that wouldn't taste good or to create addiction to the product. That's not nutritious, right? So then you can start to ask yourself, are the majority of ingredients that I'm eating nutritious? and you'll start to make different changes, I think, just based on using your common sense there. And then the third question I want you to ask is, where do the ingredients come from? This is very important. Do they come from a conventional farm where they're being harvested with glyphosate? Are they coming from a factory farm that is raising cattle on GMO corn and soy or Skittles? Yeah, like old candy is fed to cattle. A lot of people don't realize that. And we are what we eat. So it's really important to recognize whatever meat that you're buying, you know what they're eating.
Very, very good. Where can people go to find your beautiful book and to find out more?
You can get it at anywhere books are sold. And feedingyoulies.com. You can check it out there too.
Fantastic. And what's your main website?
Foodbabe.com.
Excellent. 2 last questions. First off, for my wife or for pregnant women in particular, favorite snacks or healthy ways to go when you have a food craving or need to get that blood sugar balanced?
So, one of the things that I ate all the time when I was pregnant is I wanted grilled cheese. And so I literally ate raw goat milk cheese, which they say not to do raw, but here in the United States, a lot of it has been aged, so it's completely fine. And my doctor actually said it was completely fine as well, but always check with your doctor, of course. And so I used a raw goat cheese on an organic homemade loaf of bread, or you can get it from like a local bakery. And then I would use grass-fed butter. And that was, one way that I kind of, was able to tackle my cravings. I craved a lot of carbohydrates just to like battle the nausea and all of that. And so I just would make sure whatever I was eating, I would remake it organic at home as opposed to try to get something out conventionally. And that really helped me a lot. I also love these little brown rice crackers that were good to eat, just to, keep crackers around. They do make organic saltines, so that always is helpful. And I would just stick to that. One of the things I love to have too was ginger tea. Mm-hmm. It helped with the nausea, and then lots and lots of watermelon.
Awesome, awesome. Any last words of wisdom you want to share, or words of wisdom for parents and their kids?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one of the things I've realized since having a daughter, she's actually over 2 now.
Yay.
She is really influenced on my habits and what I'm doing and what I'm bringing in the house and what's in the pantry and things that I have control over. And I think, we're not going to have control over our kids forever. And we're really not. We're supposed to allow them to become their own adults and, be their own individual people eventually. But I think as long as we do maintain the household and we're in control of the budget and what we bring in the house, I say take that responsibility as very important, because this is your opportunity to leave a mark on your child and let them know what's truly healthy and what's not, and give them the opportunity to taste and experience an abundance of plant-based foods so that they understand and know the different types of food that's out there, and they're not just have their blinders on and they only know chicken nuggets and pizza and a hamburger, which is on a typical kids menu. It's like you have to take your responsibility as a parent and broaden your children's horizons about what's truly out there in terms of food, because when you eat real food, the options are endless. And the people think that giving up processed food is very very restrictive. It's actually not. It's not restrictive at all. It's actually one of the least restrictive diets. You don't give up any ingredient. You can actually eat all the things that God has made for us to eat. And it's a beautiful thing, and you can create anything in your kitchen. And I just say to take that responsibility very importantly in your life. And I think it's something that's a lot of fun to be able to teach my daughter about the different fruits and vegetables. And she knows, so many more vegetables than I knew growing up. And I didn't even know about kale until my 20s, and she's having it every single day at age 2. So you really have a lot of influence on your children, and it's important for you to use that wisely. And it also depends on what you're eating too, because I can tell you, if I start to eat something that's not healthy, she wants it too. And if all she sees me eating is good stuff, I'm an incredible influence on her, and she will, we will plant the seeds that hopefully stay with her life.
Woohoo! Well, thank you so much, Vani. This has been fantastic. This has been phenomenal. I want everybody to go out and get Feeding Your Lives. Dad, Mom, I'm talking to you. And I want to go back to your website, and there was something, I don't usually do baked goods. It's exceptionally rare, but you have almond butter brownies on there, and I have got to check these out.
Oh, they're so healthy too. I mean, they're like really one of the healthiest desserts I have on the website, and they're really good for you. So
very, very cool. So for everyone out there, this is Michael Sandler saying, be well, have fun, get Feeding You Lies, and begin reclaiming your health today. And shine bright. Woohoo! Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael. I really appreciate it.
Thanks so much for watching. If you enjoyed it, be sure to like below. Also, leave your comments. Have some real fun with it. Subscribe to our channel where you're going to get more great videos, more interviews coming up. And check out our website, inspirenationshow.com. That's where you'll find tips, blogs, information, videos you won't find anywhere else, and useful and helpful resources to really help you kickstart your life and to shine bright. Thanks so much again. Thank you for your support. Like, comment, subscribe. See the website. Thanks so much, and have fun. Of course, shine bright. Woohoo!